Romans 15, and we're going to look at verses 30 and 32. 30 through 32. Romans 15, verses 30 through 32. Romans 15, verses 30 through 32. And so since we just finished our missions conference, I thought it would be appropriate if we just took a couple of minutes and looked at how we can pray for missionaries. And Paul gives us a recipe on how to pray for missionaries because he tells us how to pray for him. He told the church at Rome in these verses how to pray for him. And since he was the first human missionary, I figure he would have some pretty good insight. So we'll look at a couple of different, I have three things that he lists here. And so we'll spend a couple of minutes looking at how we can pray for missionaries from Romans, chapter number 15, verses 30 through 32. And it says in verse 30, "Now I beseech you, brethren, for the Lord Jesus Christ's sake, and for the love of the Spirit, that you strive together with me in your prayers to God for me." And so there he is plainly saying, pray for me. Verse 31, "That I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea, and that my service which I have for Jerusalem may be accepted of the saints, and that I may come unto you with joy by the will of God, and may with you be refreshed." And so in these two verses, verses 31 and 32, we'll get the three things that Paul was asking for prayer for himself. And so I've kind of took those and amplified it just a little bit, gave a couple of other verses to go along with it. But in verse 31, we have the first one. The first way we can pray for a missionary is pray for their safety. Paul says in verse 31, "That I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea." You know, our missionaries are in countries that don't believe like America believes. And then they don't believe like the Bible believes. And then some of them are in America and they don't believe like Americans believe. Right? We were just talking about David Gates. He's in Dearborn, Michigan. That's Muslim America. They don't believe like we believe. And they certainly don't believe the Bible. And that's why he's there reaching those folks. And he was giving me some really good information on Sunday night when I was chatting with him. And some good stuff that he'll be able to share with you guys. But they've had groups come in and go out and witness to Muslims during Ramadan and going to coffee shops after dark and staying there until the morning, speaking with Muslims, and Muslims stopping these young people and asking them questions. Tell us more about what you're saying. Tell us more about the Bible. Tell us more about Jesus Christ. And so there's some good stuff going on. But in the midst of that, there are some evil people, and so we need to pray for safety for our missionaries. So point number one is pray for their safety. And again, Paul was asking for it because the Jews, every time he went into a city, what happened to Paul? He would go to the synagogue, he would start to preach, the Jews would get mad and they would stone him, beat him, throw him into jail, all three. Or two of the three. One time they stoned him and left him for dead. And so there are story after story after story of missionaries that have been killed on the field. And of course, if you know anything about mission history, there's the famous five that went to the island. What's her name? Oh, I'm tired, you could tell. Elizabeth Elliot. Was one of them. She was married, of course, her husband was one of the five that went to the Auca Indians on this island. Well, they were cannibals. And these were the first white people to show up on that island. And they ended up being killed by the Auca Indians. And the wives came back. And of course, Elizabeth Elliot has written testimony after testimony after testimony and book after book about what happened there. And then I want to say not too many years after that, another team of missionaries went to the Auca Indians and won the whole tribe. But, you know, those first 5 needed prayers for safety. I remember another missionary account where, and it was a tribe again, and I believe they were in Africa. They could have been in a tribal nation that was not Africa, maybe like Haiti, somewhere like that, an island nation. But one tribe got mad at the missionary that was there, and they were coming that night to kill them in their house. And the missionary started to pray, but then some folks back home were praying for the safety of this missionary. And there was a special prayer meeting. Something happened where the church called the special prayer meeting for this missionary. And the tribe was on their way to the house, and the missionary was hunkered down in the house. And they were laying in their bed just waiting. And then all of a sudden the sun comes up, and nobody attacked their house. And not too many days afterwards, the leader, the chief of the tribe, comes to the missionary. And the missionary was like, I thought you were coming to my house to kill us, and you were going to come and attack us. And he said, we were on our way. But there were like 50 giant men outside your compound, and we could not get past them.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Praise God.
You know how many people were praying? 50. When we pray for safety, stuff like that happens. So certainly when we're praying for our missionaries, and especially if they're laid on your heart really bad. I mean, there's some nights when I can't sleep, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm tired, my bones ache. I take Tylenol, I try to go to sleep, I still can't go to sleep. I'm like, oh, wait, hold on a second. All right, Lord, who needs prayer? I go through the church, so I'm praying for you guys. I go through our missionaries, and I'm praying for them. So if the Lord does something like that for you, it might be He's keeping you awake so that you'll start to pray. And you'll be a giant man outside of a compound, protecting somebody. So pray for safety. Again, just as Paul says here, that I may be delivered from them. This one missionary was delivered from that tribe, right? They didn't believe. You know what that tribe did? They believed. There's some other stories, man. I remember one missionary in Haiti, and I think I've mentioned this years ago in our church. This missionary came to Ambassador when I was a student there. And demonism is really big there. And they would say that their 10-year-old son would wet the bed all the time because he couldn't get out of bed for the demon presence that was there. As a matter of fact, they said that there were some nights where his bed was bouncing like this in his room. And the only thing that they could do was take the Bible on tape and slide the tape recorder in there with the Word of God being read, and all of a sudden that bed goes. That stuff is real. They would, he would also tell us, you remember in the old days, the freezers, they would have that little orange light on the front of it? Right? You remember that, the little round light on your freezer? So that you knew it was on? They said they would watch that thing do this on the freezer. at night. And the only thing they could do again was read the Word of God. And it would stop. And so certainly pray for safety. The second thing, he says in verse number 31, and that my service which I have for Jerusalem may be accepted of the saints. Pray for their service. They're there winning souls. They're there planting seeds. They're watering seeds. They're reaping. They're harvesting. They're baptizing. They're teaching. When we were talking to Joey Tacon, all the stuff that he's doing for the Italian people, trying to get materials that are in English into Italian so that he can train his men and train his people. His service it's the whole Great Commission. It's we win souls, we baptize them, and then we teach them and train them and bring them up. And so that's this service. And just write this down and I'll summarize it. The Bible passage is Acts chapter 17, verses 20 through 34.
20 through 34.
Acts chapter 17, verses 22 through 34. And he's just giving an account of when he was on Mars Hills and he's in Greece and he's seeing all these statues that are along the pathway that went up Mars Hill. And he pointed to one that said to the unknown God, and he said, him is the one that I want to preach to you, and I want to tell you about the unknown God. And then it says they went back through the churches that they had planted and rehearsed all that God had done in the churches. And that's what we do when we video conference our missionaries and we read their prayer letters and they come and they visit us. They're coming back and rehearsing all that God had done.
So exciting.
Right? And to hear all the stuff that's going on. The Becks having the family of 11 showing up. In Germany having a parking problem. In Misawa, Japan having a parking problem.
What an incredible problem to have.
Right?
Things are growing.
And let's see, the Marquezes with all the work that they're doing, looking at turning the church over. All the stuff that Joey Tacon was doing. The Stovers getting to the place now where they can actually speak to the people and get ministries going. I mean, just all the stuff that we were hearing. That's service that our missionaries are doing. And we need to certainly pray about their service and for their service. And you'll hear me pray when I pray for the missionaries that they would get fruit, that they would have fruit that lasts, all of that their service would be well, it would be good. And so the second thing we ought to pray for is service. And the third one we find in verse number 32. And it says that I may come unto you with joy by the will of God, and may with you be refreshed. We need to pray for encouragement. We need to pray that we as a church encourage them. Right? And that's why we do what we do in our missions conferences. That's why we read their letters. And when we do speak to them, my wife will be on Facebook with them, or I'll be on Facebook with them, and we'll ask them specific things that they write in their prayer letters. That is an encouragement because now they know there's actually somebody out there paying attention. Because I know when I was on the mission field, we felt like we were the only ones there. And that's how missionaries feel. And so we need to definitely pray for encouragement for them. Look with me in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. First Thessalonians chapter 3, we'll start in verse number 6. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse number 6. Now, who wrote Thessalonians? Paul wrote it. Who's the one writing in Romans? Who's the one asking for prayer? All right. It's kind of funny how he says in the verse that we're about to read that that's how he learned encouragement. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse number 6, but now when Timotheus came from you unto us and brought us good tidings of your faith and charity, that ye have good remembrance of us always, desiring greatly to see us, as we also to see you. Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all our affliction and distress by your faith. And so how was Paul comforted? By the faith of the Thessalonians. By seeing them doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then he goes on. For now we live, if ye stand fast in the Lord. Verse 9, for what thanks can we render to God again for you? For all the joy wherewith we joy for your sakes before our God, night and day praying exceedingly that we might see your face and might perfect that which is lacking in your faith. Paul was looking for encouragement, and he found it in the church at Thessalonica. Do you see what he says there? We were comforted. For what thanks we can render to God again for you, and the joy wherewith we joy for your sakes. And then they wanted to see him face to face. Do you remember when I told you about messaging our missionaries? Mm-hmm. How fast was it before I got the first reply?
Like 5 minutes.
1 minute. From around the world. It took them 1 minute. And I think I had 8 scheduled the first day, even before I left my office. You know why? It's a joy for them to see us face to face. Not only is it a joy for us to see them face to face, but it's a joy for them to see us. And so we ought to pray for encouragement for them, to be an encouragement to them and for them. So again, the 3 things: safety, service, and encouragement. All right, and then I have a little side note here. How do we treat missionaries when we're around them?
Just as if they were like us.
No, we treat them better than we treat us. We need to remember that they are the servants of the King of Kings. They have this special call on their life to represent the King of Kings to a world that doesn't want him. And so when a missionary comes to our church or we're speaking to them, we need to treat them way better than we treat one another. These are special people. And we need to keep that in mind. They're not lower life forms. There used to be a stigma in the past where, oh, you're a missionary. Okay. Well, I've got some used tea bags that I'm going to send to you because that'll be a blessing to you. And I'm going to go through the junk in my house and box it up and send it to you because that'll be a blessing to you. No, that's not how we treat missionaries. And this has been our practice ever since we opened this church, because we saw how we were treated by some churches. And we said, we're never going to treat a missionary like that, or we're going to treat missionaries like that. So we've seen both sides. Mm-hmm. And so the way we treat missionaries, we take good care of them. We should give them our best. Again, not the used tea bags, not the thing. And then we ought to be excited when they come. You know, they're making an effort to come to our church. Yeah. And they're scared to death.
Why?
Well, this isn't their church. You are strangers. And there's some whacked out churches out there. And they don't know what to expect when they come into the church. Because there are some people that say, oh, we've been saving up our used tea bags for a year now, and you can take them with you. We've, personally, we've stayed in a house that was mowed over by a tornado the year before, and the outside was rebuilt, but the inside was not. And that's when my two boys were still living with us, and they had like 3 or 4 daughters, and all of them were upstairs, and the only way they had divisions up there was they hung sheets from the rafters to make divisions up there, and that's where my boys were sleeping with their daughters.
Oh, no. That's not too cool.
We went to dinner with the youth pastor on one of the nights of the missions conference, and he says, why are you people here? That's the youth pastor of the church. Do you think that's the way we ought to treat missionaries?
No.
You think that's the way we ought to treat any human being?
No.
Now, thankfully, the Lord knows and the Lord saw it. The next missions conference that we were in, we were in Boston. We stayed in the top level of a mansion. He was a lawyer in Boston, and they had like a multi-million-dollar house, and they gave us the whole top level of it.
Wow.
For us to be able to stay in. My wife is still in contact with their wife. That's what they thought of missionaries. This is 30, 35 years later. And my wife is still in contact with with his wife. So when you had a tornado house experience, you had a mansion experience. The Lord sees it. But we're not gonna, Lord willing, as long as I'm pastor, we're not ever going to treat missionaries like that. And we ought to be excited when they come, and we need them. I remember one year my mission board president preached this message. He says, the way a church ought to treat a missionary when they come. And the first thing was the pastor ought to be seeking out missionaries and calling the missionary, saying, we need you to come to our church. Not the other way around. I remember sitting in our church's office for 8 hours a day making phone calls to churches across America. And if I got past the church secretary, I could get a meeting. So if somebody answered, and if I got past the church secretary, we could schedule a meeting. And so I was on the phone 8 hours a day. There were days when I would come home and I'm like, I'm not ever going to go back. I'm not going back and making phone calls. And then our mission board president said, this is what ought to really happen. The pastor of a church ought to be calling missionaries and saying, we need you to come to our church because we need our church to be blessed of God. You remember I preached from Philippians chapter 4? You know how God meets our needs? By the church taking care of missionaries, supporting missionaries, and praying for missionaries. So pastors ought to be calling up missionaries. Come to our church and help us out. Not the other way around. And when they do come, I'll always say, there's our missionary, make sure you fellowship with them. We're going to, like this week, I introduced them before the international supper so that we weren't sitting here and they were sitting over there, right? We need to intermingle with them and talk with them. And then when we have a missionary on other nights, we usually take them to Culver's, and I invite the church to come. You come and fellowship with them. That's the way we ought to treat missionaries. I don't put them in the same hotels that they put me in. Right? I'm not looking for the cheapest hotel when we put somebody up in a hotel. If they don't stay at our house, I'm not looking for the cheapest hotel. Now, I am looking for a good price. But there's a certain rating that I'm looking at. A level of the hotel that I'm willing to put somebody else in. Because I am not going to put them in. Red Roof Inn used to be a good hotel. It's not. Not anymore. I used to put them in Red Roof Inn. They were a nice hotel and they were inexpensive. But now it's gotten to be where the Hilton right here on Broadway is a cheap hotel for us, and it's a nice one. And so here lately, we've been putting all of our guests at the Hilton because it's a good price. And it's right there. And it's really close to our church, so they're not driving from the airport, which is the majority of the other hotels. The other place that we put them is right over here. Go down Broadway and Williams Center. Right on Broadway. And so there's a group of hotels that are right there. They're either really good priced or the Hilton. And that's where we put them. Because we're not just going to put them in a flea bag. Flea-ridden, crime-ridden. There's a La Quinta over there by the Denny's. And I put Caleb and Kristen there one time. And when we dropped them off, I was like, are you sure you guys are okay here? Because I was a little sketchy about that place. I'm not going to put any missionary there again. Yep, I'm not going to put anybody there again. It's just not on the level that I think a missionary will be staying at. So you see, all of that is how we ought to treat missionaries. So number one, we ought to be praying for missionaries. Number two, we ought to treat them like royalty when they come. Now, I can have a little fun with them because I am one. Okay? But as a whole, we take good care of our missionaries when they come. We take good care of them. And that's the way that it ought to be. All right, questions or comments about anything that we've covered tonight? How to pray for